No need for any more intro, except to say that I now live in Tasmania. So I live in Launceston. I still work at St Vincent's in Melbourne half the time, so I'm kind of travelling a bit. But the rest of the time I'm in the Centre for Rural Health at UTAS. And I grew up in Tassie. And I have a sense of the additional burden and complexity and trickiness that it is to live in a rural and regional area. I also know of how fantastic it is because of the support you get, because the lifestyle's better, all of those things. So I have some sense of that. I also wanted to say, my cousin was telling me recently, so she has metastatic breast cancer, that over the summer someone gave her one of those gel mats that they have for pets. Have you ever heard of them? So for dogs to go on. And so she puts it's to put her feet on because she has some peripheral neuropathy. And it really helps. So there's a tip that you might want to try. If you've got one at home for the dog, give it a try. You know, we're still trying lots of different things, aren't we? One of the things about having a cancer diagnosis is about control, and it feels like the control in your life has been just ripped from under you. And I have a sense, I've never had cancer, but I've worked with many, many people who have. I have a sense of the shock of having your life completely turned upside down. And what I want to talk about today is some of the things you can do to take some of that back. And sometimes that is, you know, we all the time, we have no control over the things that happen in our lives. But this is the one thing we can control, and that is how we manage it, how we focus on it, how we control it. So, you never know how strong you are until being strong is your only choice. Ain't that the truth? Many of you probably, if 5 years before a diagnosis or a loved one's diagnosis, said, how would you do, you know, if you suddenly had cancer? And you may well have gone, there is no way I could cope with that. How would you go having a cancer diagnosis when you've just had a baby? How would you go when, you know, all the things that we would just go, there is no way. And what is the most incredible thing that I constantly have learnt is the strength of the human spirit, and somehow we find it in ourselves. And we need to remember that, because it's the same whenever another bad thing happens. Actually, you have it in you to somehow, and we amaze ourselves. But we don't have a choice. So the whole statements we get about how wonderful we are, and you're so strong, and you're so, all that sort of stuff. And it's like I actually don't have any other choice but to do this. And especially, I have to say, especially women who have a lot of other people they're probably caring for in their life. There's not much choice but to keep going. But there are ways we can do that to benefit ourselves even better. There's a woman called Emily McDowell, and she makes cards that are fantastic. I can't remember how many I use in this, maybe only a couple. But they all say kind of what we would like to say. And this one says, I promise to never refer to your illness as a journey unless someone takes you on a cruise. There's a whole lot of things that are said to us that just annoy and don't feel like people realise what we're actually going through. A common one I hear is, but you look so well. You look great. And I know that with advanced breast cancer, people really don't know what to do with that, you know. So this is, oh, so you're fine now, or, wow, you still got breast cancer. I don't quite get that. And we know that the living with it is really big. A number of years ago, when the treatments started to get better and better, and people with advanced breast cancer were living longer, we actually set up a telephone counselling service at BCNA because the clinicians didn't know how to manage that, and we couldn't say, well, we know this is going to go for 5 years or 10 years or forever, and we somehow expected the people living with advanced breast cancer to know how to deal with that. What does that mean? And we had a whole service for a while because it was so kind of unknown. I like to use an analogy of a bridge. And this is about adjustment to any change. And one of the things about cancer is that you have an initial adjustment, but actually things come up. So we do it over and over again with new things. But if you think about yourself prior to any idea that you had cancer, and I find this, it's interesting for women who have had a family history and are kind of expecting it. I think some of this is still the same. So prior to diagnosis, you're at the other side of the bridge. You're in a territory that you know who your friends are, you know what you're going to do next week, you might even have a 5-year plan, all those things. Suddenly, everything's turned upside down, and you have to cross a bridge to whatever is on the other side, whether you like it or not. And there's adjusting to do on every level. And I often would get referred people when they were about there, going, this is horrible, nothing that I've been able to manage in my life before. I don't know how to do this, and this feels so not me, and I don't know what I'm doing. This painting is of a blind woman, which is also kind of makes it even more big. But I think one of the things we don't do is talk about this process. So to say, this is probably where you're at the moment, and that makes sense because you are adjusting to a whole lot of things. Let's go through some of the things that are particularly hard at the moment, because this turns the whole world upside down, and then start managing those things rather than just going, yeah, you've got it, now you have to just acknowledge it. But it is, it's not a journey, but it is certainly a bit of a road that you go down. This is a picture of what's called Jacob's Ladder. It's a drive up to one of the mountains not very far from me in Launceston, where we would go for the snow. And it's absolutely terrifying. And the older I get, I remember going up there on the back of a ute when I was like 22 or something, and our friend, he was spinning and stuff. I can hardly go up it with my eyes closed now. But the thing is, you go up, and if someone's coming down, so it's one lane, just to let you know, and it's often slippery and icy. If someone's coming down, you have to reverse back and just be in one of the corner bits to look at. Anyway, apparently there's not been that many accidents there, but this is a bit like what it feels like to be going through an unknown process where you're kind of going, oh yeah, okay, I can manage this now. Oh, we've got another thing to manage. Oh, we've got another thing to manage. I think that can describe it. But it's the full extent of all the things. And one of the hardest things, I think, is just quietening the mind, because it races ahead and then it goes to here and then it, you talk to yourself, and it's just trying to quieten everything that's happening so you can get a sense. This says it's a delicate walk to balance hope with chaos, and it certainly is, until things just settle back down. Okay, so I want to tell you about a study that we did at St Vincent's in Melbourne, and it's over 20 years ago, and I think it's still really relevant. So when I first started in the oncology unit, I found I was often getting referred women with early stage breast cancer who just finished treatment and were saying, I don't know why now I'm crying all the time. And I would have known them through their treatment, and they would have, anyone would have said, well, they've done really well, and they come in, have their treatment, they've gone home, everything, they're well supported. We don't know why. And so I thought we should do a study about this. So we asked them, got a whole lot, to tell us what it had been like looking back. And what they said is the first adjustment was to go from, me as a well person or whoever, to now I'm a cancer patient. Like, that in itself is just so strange. And of course it happens overnight. It's the weirdest thing. And what they said was that the experience of getting that news was just a complete shock and the total bewilderment. And we know that shock is actually it's a physical experience, and it's a really clever cognitive experience, because when we hear something that is big and hard, bad news, we switch off. So we take it in to an extent and then we go, not going to think about that anymore. And that's so we can manage it. Really useful, and the shock will eventually wear off. But of course, and you shouldn't make decisions when you're in shock, but then we go, now you've got to make some decisions really quickly about what we're going to do next. And so the strategy during that time was just appraising, how bad is this, what does this mean for work, for the kids, for treatment, for my partner, whatever. So some quotes from this study. It was one of those moments that will live on my life, in my life. It's scary. I hope I never have that moment again when she tells me it's cancer. And many of you might actually remember what the doctor was wearing, what the room was like, what the day was like outside. It's just frozen in your memory. Another one described it like a photographic still. The crying, the feeling of tears. Mum was at the end of the bed and she burst out crying and ran. There's often times when we are dealing with overwhelmingly confronting situations when it feels like we're in the room, but we're not even in the room. We're kind of watching it happen like a bad movie, and even like a photographic still. Again, that's because we're really clever and we go, not too big, I'm just going to step back from this for a minute. So then there was the treatment phase. And I'm aware that not everyone goes through chemotherapy or any of the specific regimes, but this is what the women in this study said. So they talked about when treatment was happening, it was about just getting through. So one of them said it was like being a racehorse with the blinkers. So I am totally aware. There are people that are crying. I walk into a room, people stop talking. There's concerns about a whole lot of things. But I have to just get through this treatment. And so it's this really focus. At the same time as you were experiencing, and I use this term, I used to use it as I was kind of going through, but I use it all the time now. I believe it's a traumatic experience, and I think that's the term that we should use. So yes, treatments for breast cancer are getting better and better. It does not mean that going in and putting your arm out again and saying, yeah, give me some more of that stuff that's going to make me feel sick or whatever, is not traumatic. And the other side of that is that there needs to be going through how to cope afterwards for the trauma. Anyway, so there was this really disrupted reality, learning to live with uncertainty, which is the big one, I think, adapting to all the changes, and coping with the impact on others, which a lot of women say is one of the hardest things. I'm okay as long as I just, I don't want to have to tell my kids and see that look on their face, or my partner or my parents or whoever. So the coping strategy during this time was actually about avoidance and not really thinking about the treatments as much as possible, trying to think positive because that's what everyone was telling them to do, which we know is not helpful, focusing on all the tasks and all of the social supports that happen. So this is the time when a lot of people get a lot of phone calls and casseroles and lasagna and stuff like that. So one woman said it was just awful. It was as bad or worse than I ever expected it to be. Each time you have a dose of chemotherapy, it takes longer for your body to get better. I just really couldn't see it ending. And another, during treatment, you're in go forward mode. Well, I didn't stop to think about what was really happening to me. So then when treatment finished, and you see we have the survivor word up here, and even then we were questioning it, and this was 20 years ago. But I think it was brought up this morning, kind of what do you do when the treatment's finished? So the women were saying there was a real relief that the treatment was over, but it was mixed with this ambivalence and fear. And there was also a period of beginning to process what had happened and to plan for the future. Now, when I was trying to understand some of this, I read a number of accounts of people who'd been through a major trauma, people who had been in a plane crash or lost in the desert. They all say the same thing. So it's not until you get to this end bit that you can start to process what that experience meant to you. It makes total sense to me. But of course, most of us, as in the healthcare professions, often go, right now, where's the next newly diagnosed person? Right at the point when you actually need us. So Claire said, I can do cartwheels down the street. Gail said, I told my doctor, that's it, I'm not coming here anymore. It was really great. But Annie said, at the time of going through the treatment, the time of being operated on and having all of that, it was a time when I didn't really think I ever really had cancer. Looking back, I think it was a bit unreal, whereas now it's becoming real. Makes total sense to me. And I was with her when she was knowing that she did have cancer. So we know it's really hard to process trauma when you're going through it. And it's often after the initial crisis is over that you're able to consider what has happened. So that was the first lesson of just understanding that and going, okay, that's why this bit is hard and this bit now that is about me recovering. I can't possibly have 10 minutes. That was his fault. Where has he gone? Okay. So fear of recurrence, we've said, it's a really natural feeling. It happens to nearly everyone, even when you're feeling really confident. For most people, it settles. So it's a normal post-traumatic response that you're going to suddenly become very hyper-vigilant about things that are happening in your body and you're going to be wondering about what this might mean. But there are some strategies that we can do to start challenging some of the things that come into our mind, and I'll skip for that. So the big message that I would like to give you is that the anxiety you feel about having this lack of control and that everything's been turned upside down can be managed by regaining some of the power. So the anxiety comes from this uncertainty, and the reality is we all didn't know it was going to happen next year or next week or tomorrow, but most of us can kid ourselves that we do until you have an experience of cancer. And then you go, okay, I don't know how to plan. Can I plan? What does the future mean? All of those sorts of things. So it's about taking back some of that power. So there's some ways to do this. The first one is that it's really important to acknowledge your emotional distress. There is still some messages that came out of the 70s and a couple of studies that said you have to be positive. Being positive when you are dealing with something that is scary for you is completely ridiculous. I know that an experience of cancer can bring both fear and the most amazing love around you. So there are things to be positive about. But to be making yourself say to yourself, oh no, I can't be scared, or I can't think that, or I shouldn't do this, is just crazy. And what we know is that if you can express, gosh, today's bad, I'm not coping today, I need some help today, that you're going to do better in the long run. So the first thing is, this picture here says, I'm sad, tired, lonely, scared, all of those have been crossed out, and it says I'm fine. And it's about finding the places where you can say, actually, I'm not fine. Now, you probably won't be able to see this is very fine, but I think it's a really important point, so I'll describe it to you. It's really important to learn how to focus on now. I came up in the bus yesterday with some of the team, and Iris was in the bus. It was a 3.5-hour ride, and she just did some mindfulness, and she just was like this for the whole, it was amazing. She focused on now rather than all the other stuff. I was sitting there working, doing, all that stuff. So when everything feels overwhelming, and it often does, you focus on, so here's a little man, there's a big step, a big staircase of all the things to walk up to. The focus is on that first step. It's really important to decide on what time frame that you can cope with at the moment and to focus on that right now. So on bad days, I might need to say to you, do you think you can make it till lunchtime? You might wake up feeling really panicked and it's just too much, and you've read something in the newspaper again about breast cancer and it's just too much and you're completely panicked. If I then said, okay, can you make a plan to make it to lunch? Oh, well, of course I can. And then you might be able to plan the week ahead. A lot of people plan from one doctor's visit to another. I can make some plans between that and the scary scans and those sorts of things. And that, it changes all the time. So there are some days when you're going, I'm going along fine, I'm not today, okay, I need to shrink things back. It's when we start thinking, what about this and what about next Christmas and the Christmas after and the wedding and the whatever, no one knows the answer to that. And that's when our mind gets away from us. So the first trick is to constantly bring yourself back to, what can I focus on right now? I know there's big stuff going on, but right now, can I do this right now? The second is to challenge some of what we call automatic negative thoughts. So all of us go to certain places in our mind, and they're like patterns, so we do it all the time when we're in a bit of a difficult place, and it can make everything feel so much worse. So here's a picture where it says thought, emotion, physical, behaviour. And this is because our immediate thoughts about a situation makes the emotion happen, and then our behaviour. And what we can do is learn how to change the thought. The best thing is for me to give an example. So here's the situation. You've heard that some of your friends went out without you. I like putting this one up here because we think that shouldn't bother us anymore. It does. Doesn't matter how old we are. How come they didn't? Why? Anyway. Okay, so the thought is, they don't really like me, I don't mean anything to them, or whatever your thought is. Now, this is negative thinking, but it's an immediate thought, and often we don't even kind of acknowledge the thought, it just kind of, that's what I'm thinking. You feel down and upset, so that's the emotional response. You might start to get a headache, feel tight in your shoulders, you withdraw and you don't contact them. So that's the automatic negative thought. And all of us have ones that we often do. See if you can recognise any of these. So there's black and white thinking. I'm either going to be cured or I'm going to die. One or the other. There's overgeneralising. My husband spends so much time taking care of me, I'm so weak and needy. Discounting positives. My tests show that the treatment is working, but I think the cancer will probably come back. It's jumping to these conclusions in our head. Mind reading. I do this to my husband all the time. My friend hasn't called me to see how I'm doing because she doesn't care about me. So and should statements. That's a good one. I should not burden my friends or family to ask for help no matter what. So we all have these ones that we jump to. So I want to give you a couple of examples of how we can challenge them. So here is the trigger. You notice your shoulder hurts when you're hanging out the washing. The thought is the cancer's spread. It's definitely that. It's not that I was gardening all weekend. It's that I know where this is. So I immediately catastrophize it. I start to breathe fast. My heart rate goes up. I might go to bed, feel panicked and not want to talk to people, and I might avoid going to the oncologist or even my GP. It's too scary, I can't do it. Now, what we need to learn to do is how to challenge those thoughts. So if we're going along fine, we get a bit of a sore, then we're feeling terrible, and then we stop and go, hang on, why am I starting to feel like this? It's because my shoulder's hurting. I need to check what I'm thinking. So one thing we could do is to remind ourselves that there's lots of reasons why my shoulder could be sore and I should address it and move on. I might do some breathing exercises to calm myself down because I've got myself all tense now. And I might make a plan. I'm going to use some mild painkillers, heat pack, and then if it's still there, I'm going to go and see the doctor. So I've taken charge of what felt like an out of control feeling. Here's another one. You're due for another scan. Now, I've jumped from the thought here because often we only recognise what's happening in our body and our feelings, and we have missed that there was a thought back there. So there's another scan coming up in 2 days. You're starting to feel tense, you're getting a bit of a headache. You're not really able to sleep and you're snapping at everyone around in the house. The impact is that there's tensions on your relationships and you feel like you're not coping. And then you go, actually the thought is that it's another scan and they're going to tell me again, and I know what that felt like when they told me the first time. So that's what's doing this. Totally understandable. So how can you fix it? Stop and think about why you're feeling tense and make a plan to address it. Change the thought. Remind yourself that actually probably before every scan you are going to feel antsy and anxious, and it's understandable, and you can't change it, and it's silly to tell yourself that you shouldn't get worried, but you might want to let everyone know, do you know what, this is this week of scan, I'm starting to feel antsy, I need to get busy, or I need to not talk to people, or whatever I need to do, I'm going to plan it. So planning up. So actually stopping and trying to take charge of some of these thoughts. Fourth point is learning to let go of the things that you can't control. I need to remind myself of this all the time. So some of the things you can't control is the need to be perfect, living up to the expectations of others, fear of failure and holding on to control, the need to please everyone, self-doubt and comparison, the things that we all carry with us, we carried them with us prior to this diagnosis. But if we can start letting go of these things, and it is something that I hear, that I suddenly learned how to say no to things when I got breast cancer. It gave me permission to do that. But actually stopping when you are completely overwhelmed by all the things and going, there are some things I am going to let go of now, and I'm actually going to just focus on what I need to, is important. Now, the fifth one, and I will describe this because you won't be able to read it from back there. This is what I did my PhD on, and it was around looking at the role of meaning for people with advanced cancer. And it started with a whole lot of interviews with people with advanced cancer, and we just asked them to tell us what life was like. And then we had a look at, does this actually give us any main themes? And what people talked about was that some of their days were spent with suffering, how they would describe their suffering, with coping, the things they just had to do to get through the day, and with meaning, the amazing joy. They suddenly knew how loved they were, or they just loved being in the garden, or they were more aware of how incredible a sunset was than before. And what they said was, and the reason why we drew it like this, which is of course a really ancient symbol, is that people moved in and out of it all the time. So an example might be that someone wakes up and they've got pain, and so that's the first thing that hits them, and they think, this is terrible, you know, I don't even know why I bother, I'm awake and I've got pain. And then so that's suffering. Their partner comes in and says, you know, take your medications and go and have a warm shower, you know, it almost makes you feel better, so they do that. That's the things we do to cope. And then a friend rings and says, do you want to go for a walk? And they go for a walk and they go, gosh, I'm so lucky. We do that all the time, don't we? We move in and out of those three things. And then we looked at what holds people together. What do you need to be able to do that moving in and out, which is normal, but still feel okay? And we got this, what ended up being this green circle. And we measured this. And as a social worker, I was happy to do just wanting to hear the experiences and what people told us. But when we could measure it, it actually became something that all the rest of the team wanted to know about too. The three things that held these people together were connection with other people, was almost number one. And if you are having periods where you are feeling lonely, or if you are not connecting, do anything you can to connect. It doesn't have to be go to something that is cancer specific. It might be that you just join one thing that you do once a week that can be to do with anything that interests you. Being connected to other people is crucial to how we help, it helps us to move on. Having more meaning in life, and I'm going to tell you a bit more about that in a minute, and having your physical symptoms managed. So if in fact you're going along and there's a thing that's happening, you're getting headaches or you've got something that's bothering you and you're going, I can't think about it because I don't want to let people know or whatever reason, the burden of that is going to be holding you back. So going, I'm going to deal with the physical things, I'm going to make sure I've got some connections. You don't need many, you just need a couple that you feel like you can be you with. And I'm going to look at the things that are meaningful in my life and I'm going to make sure I have more of them. So an example of this is I grew up on the northwest coast of Tasmania, like a sandbank away from the beach. So going to any beach for me makes me immediately feel calmer. And then I lived 25 years in the suburbs in Melbourne, And my husband would be the one that would remember, when my father died, he said, get in the car, and we drove down the coast. Because I know the things that bring me joy. So being at the beach, good cup of tea, talking to friends, there's a few. None of them are massive things, but if I don't have them, I am depleted. And we forget. We go, oh yeah, I enjoy going to the beach, but I don't really have time. No, it's actually crucial that you have the stuff that's meaningful in your life. Okay, so what we're talking about here is the pursuit of what I would call little meanings. So it is the stuff where we walk outside and notice right now that the sun has finally come out. And if we were to walk out there and feel that on our skin, and we might just go, yeah, that's beautiful. I need to notice those things. A fascination with nature. We know when we've talked to people who have been through suffering, these are some of the things that really stand out for them. Doing what you love, which may be stage diving, like this guy, or it may be just how that feels when you're, I have a friend who's just started horse riding again. She hasn't since she was 12. She's been going through some stuff. She got on a horse and she just went for a ride and she went, I feel that again. So for you to actually go, what are those things? Is it having grandchildren around? Is it having a nice bath on you need to think about when do I feel like that, and am I doing that enough? Kindness, the simple beauty in the world. There's heaps of it around here, I'm noticing. Connection keeps coming back. We've measured this. It is so important. And it's really important to check in with what you need right now. And as I said before when I was talking about the road that goes like this, it changes all the time. So we have to do these checks regularly. So what are you doing to take care of yourself? And you might go, oh yeah, I'm doing stuff. And what I'd like to say is, tell me, how often? What are you doing? How long? Are you really doing stuff to take care of yourself? Are you getting the best medical care? Do you feel like you've got the answers that you need? Do you need to do any more about that? These are things that can weigh on you if you're not getting the answers. Are you seeking, finding support, encouragement and love from those around you? Sometimes the people you're closest to are really, they don't want to hear that you're worried about stuff. They want to just focus on let's getting on with things, or why you're still upset when the treatment worked, or all that stuff. So if that is the case, then get support from other people as well, and love what you get from both those groups. Is there something more from any of the possibilities open to you that might enrich your life right now? And if there's a thing you can think of, you need to make sure you do it this week. Just one little thing. And keep putting those in, because it's about how do we focus on now and how do we make now wonderful, regardless of the other stuff that's going on that we have to cope with. And allow yourself permission to not be brave sometimes. So I started off with the only choice I have is to be strong. It's okay to sometimes not be brave. This little lion that says here, courage does not always roar. Sometimes courage is the quiet voice at the end of the day saying, I will try again tomorrow. We have these big ideas of I'm going to be the most amazing person with cancer, and I'm going to, do all of the healthy things, and I'm going to whatever. But actually, it's okay to go, sometimes I'm just going to try again tomorrow, and I'm going to go, I got through today. That's enough on some of those days. Okay. I jumped over, because we have just about run out of time, the impact on the people around you. And I just want to acknowledge that it's one of the really big things that I think a lot of women carry, and a lot of their partners and friends who love them carry, is this worry about each other. And it's really important to acknowledge that it's not something that you've done and something that you need to fix, and we need to talk about it within families. We know that little people in our lives, the children, grandchildren, little friends, need to be explained what's going on in a really honest way. We need to involve, the whole family, because my belief is that cancer comes into a family, it doesn't come into one person's life. And we often, we don't tend to do that enough.